Now, Washington State, led by Attorney General Bob Ferguson, is actually attempting to weaponize the state even more in an effort to silence dissent, free thought, free speech, free association, and pretty much every other constitutional protection that's afforded to us as a free people. When Bob Ferguson apparently read George Orwell's 1984, which presumably was probably still allowed back when he was in school, Ferguson apparently thought it was an instruction manual rather than a cautionary tale of governmental abuse. So let's take a look at one of the more extreme bills that have been proposed in the legislature this session, House Bill 1333, and then put this insanity in the context of current government overreach. Now, we are right in the middle of Washington State's part-time legislative session right now. Every year there's many stupid bills that are written by the usual suspects, and they're introduced. Thousands of them, actually. However, only a few hundred get through the session and land on the governor's desk for final approval in usually April and May. So I only put this in context because just because somebody introduces something that's crazy or insane, that doesn't mean that it's going to actually become law. So I can't do a video on every stupid and insane idea that's proposed by our state legislators in Olympia. First of all, there just isn't enough time. I'd need to be spending 12 hours a day just producing videos on absurdity just like this, and it would get both tedious and boring over time. However, I will try to cover a few of the more insane bills as well as any good ones that might accidentally get past the big government censors. So before I go any further, I just want to remind everyone that if you enjoyed this video, to like, share, and subscribe. You can do that down below. It doesn't cost you a thing, but it does help our channel get a little bit more visibility on videos that are similar to this. Also, if you have any comments, especially if you disagree with me, or you have some inside information, please feel free to leave those comments below. I do pretty much try to read them all, and I try to respond to them, most of them as quickly as I can. So back to the crazy. In order to understand proposed Bill HB 1333, you need a bit of background first. And the reason it's called HB, which stands for House Bill 1333, is because House Bill 1666 was already taken. So that was probably disappointing, I'm sure, to Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson. But anyway, this bill is considered by most concerned observers to be the first step in creating this kind of statewide equivalent version of what the Biden administration proposed, the Misinformation Governance Board, or as it was called, the Ministry of Truth, which most people called it nationally. The Ministry of Truth reference, of course, comes from George Orwell's 1984 dystopian novel, and it actually refers to the government agency that was used to silence dissent, control the narrative, change history, and prevent wrongthink. And while this task is currently done by many in big government today, it isn't formalized yet due to the resistance of free people in our Constitution. The Biden administration officially dumped that censorship project once the worldwide ridicule reached such a crescendo that his handlers quietly shut down the idea and kind of put it on ice for now. The basic idea, though, behind this project, both at the national and the state level, is to create a formal government bureaucracy that institutionalizes the censorship and silencing of political or intellectual dissent by all who disagree with the government. And this means disagreement on vaccines, on masks, corruption, exposing corruption, questioning school district policy, being able to define what a woman is, and pretty much anything that is considered a microaggression at the Evergreen State College. Right now, this is still being done, but it's a little haphazard using the FBI, elected officials like Congressman Schiff, and other kind of shadow government leaders who essentially control and direct Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and other tech companies in their censorship and the silencing of all who refuse to conform to the government-endorsed kind of Borg-like groupthink that's currently in vogue right now. The Biden administration and then Washington State, Bob Ferguson, they just want to formalize and institutionalize this, which is why we're seeing these proposals at this time. But thanks to the Twitter files releases, which have been largely ignored by the controlled and tamed corporate media, which should be no surprise since they're directly implicated in that expose, we know this is a fact, and it's been happening for quite a while now. Now, sure, the Biden administration, they backed down, but this was also partly because they appointed just a complete weirdo and a singing clown named Nina Jankowicz. I don't know where they find these weirdos. I really don't. But apparently government's full of them, and thanks to their egos, narcissism, and their arrogance, they expose themselves in such a flamboyant way that they just shock normal people into just open rebellion. But at the state level, Bob Ferguson may be just as much a clown as Nina Jankowicz, but he controls his social media presence a bit more, and he hasn't been caught publicly singing about how he hopes to jail all who dissent in this state. Ferguson presumably keeps those plans closer to his chest. Now, for the Star Wars fans out there, just think about Order 66. So instead, Ferguson proposes this HB 1333, which is titled An Act Establishing the Domestic Violence Extremism Commission. Now, presumably, he chose this language rather than the Misinformation Governance Board that the Biden administration proposed because it just sounds better, but the goal is essentially the same. Now, wait, I know what you're wondering. How does Bob Ferguson define what a domestic violence extremist is? And that's easy. Essentially, it's anyone who disagrees with his agenda or policy goals. Simple answer. But in order to get there, we have to take a lot of steps first. And oh, by the way, I'm definitely on the top of that list. Ferguson was extremely offended when I caught him breaking Washington State's campaign finance laws when I filed a PDC complaint against him actually a few years ago. And he hasn't forgotten. The PDC may have given him a free pass, but he knows I caught him red-handed. And in his world, that is something that lowly peasants like me just are not allowed to do. So, in Ferguson's own statements, that he clearly recognizes that this board is designed to trample on the constitutional protections afforded us regular people in Washington State, both actually by our state and federal constitutions. In many ways, our state constitution is stronger. So once he can label his political opponents as extremists, then he can use the power of the state to destroy them, sort of like he's been practicing on initiative activist Tim Eyman over the past few years. I mean, nothing threatens an abusive bureaucracy and a corrupt government official more than free speech, independent thought, and different opinions. And the fear that has been created in corrupt and dishonest people, like Bob Ferguson, is just so strong that this is the first real step in what I believe is just a desperate attempt to silence all who disagree. They want to do this before it's too late. So the bill's sponsors, and you can read who they are, reads down below like a kind of a list of both the most ignorant and the weirdest legislators in Washington State, and they're all from the extreme left, of course. And all who want to crush and silence their political opponents, this was their chance, I guess. In a way, I really can't blame them. This is just who they are. And I appreciate them coming out of the closet on this one. So, well, this is a horrible bill, of course, and nobody who votes for it should ever be forgotten. At least it helps shed this fake mask that some might have been wearing, pretending that they actually care about free speech, or the Constitution, or liberty, the right to assemble, the ability for people to think for themselves, or the healthiness of free debate in society. No more pretense. This is just the open push for these guys for total censorship and ultimately the violent suppression of all dissent. And the violence comes later, of course, but this is a great first step down that road. Now, libertarian circles have often promoted a t-shirt or image saying, "Make Orwell fiction again." I always appreciated the sentiment, and I've been equally concerned by the tendency of unchecked and unbridled and unquestioned political power to inevitably result in a push by those who view the rest of us as kind of lowly peons and peasants who dare not question our esteemed political class. Because, of course, they know better than us. I mean, they're watching out for us. And we certainly can't be expected to know what's best for ourselves. And good God, we certainly shouldn't be allowed to think for ourselves if our thoughts stray from the accepted orthodoxy of today's big brother. I mean, thoughts like that are clearly violent extremism in action, and the state must intervene. So if anyone takes the time to actually look at the bill proposal in regards to creating the stakeholder groups, you will see it as obviously an effort to create a radical, unbalanced, modern-day equivalent to the Committee on Public Safety that was created during the Great Terror of France when it was unleashed after the French Revolution. And now, I don't see guillotines being installed at the state capitol anytime soon. I will point out that the language of local protesters who support this project are just so detached from common sense and reality that rational people who care about liberty and freedom should obviously be concerned. And listen, I'm not sure this bill even survives the legislative session, but it deserves every bit of scorn, mockery, and ridicule that free people can direct towards it, and every politico that signed on to it. Like my libertarian friends, I would prefer that George Orwell's dystopian vision for the future remain fiction. And while Bob Ferguson may be using Orwell's book, 1984, as his inspiration to create his own modern version of the Ministry of Truth, we should all be questioning just what the heck we're doing with a weirdo like him in a critical public office like State Attorney General. I also want to thank everyone who testified in opposition to this stupid bill. Just because it's bad and insane, that doesn't mean you can't find enough stupid politicians in Olympia willing to vote for it. So yes, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up, and showing up to oppose, mock, and ridicule the insanity that produce bills like this, and those who squander our tax dollars on anti-liberty studies used to justify this insanity, just like this, should be something that we all spend some time doing. Let's try to make Orwell's 1984 fiction once again, and not use it like Bob Ferguson as a roadmap to a dystopian future.